Disney and Netflix and Waterstones make loads of money from telling stories. We love stories. They help us make sense of the world we live in. They make things feel meaningful. We love telling stories as well, which is why social media is so big. We love to tell stories where we're the main character that make our lives feel meaningful. We want to tell stories that hold people's attention and make them feel something because we want our lives to matter. When I was a student, I was in my second year of university, I met a guy who started talking to me about who Jesus is and what it means to follow him. I was really positive about having conversations with him about this, reading the Bible with him, because I was really positive about Jesus. I grew up going to church. I believed that what I'd been told was true, that there's one God, that Jesus is the incarnation of God, that he reveals God to us, and that he died on the cross so that our sin would be forgiven and we could be reconciled with God and have an eternal life with God in heaven. So I was really positive and happy to learn more and to understand better what it means to follow Jesus. And I was having these conversations, this challenge kept coming up that I needed to choose between Jesus and sin. That's something my friend said to me. You need to choose between Jesus and sin. And I thought, why do I have to do that? And I'm really grateful that Jesus died so that my sin would be forgiven. And I really want to, receive that forgiveness and enter into eternal life. I want to go to heaven when I die. But, as well, as much as I like Jesus, I like all of these sins, all these things that I know are maybe like not good things, immoral things, but I like doing them. I like the way I feel when I use pornography. I like the way I felt when I was getting drunk with my friends. And I thought, well, maybe these things are not good. I'm not like proud to have done any of these things, but Jesus is kind and gracious. So why can't he just bear with me? Why can't he just bear with me for now and then forgive me? And when I die, we put it all behind us and have a happily ever after. So I was struggling with this Jesus or sin thing because the way I was thinking about sin was just, these actions are not good. They're bad things to do. When the Bible talks about sin, it's more than just a list of actions that are not good. In the beginning of the Bible, Adam and Eve are cast out of the garden because they have rejected God's wisdom and they've come up with a wisdom of their own that has led them into death and exile from God's presence. And then in the next chapter, Genesis chapter 4, we have the first time the word sin is used in the Bible. So sin is described earlier. Adam and Eve definitely sinned in trying to replace God's wisdom with their own wisdom. But in chapter 4, we have the first time the word is actually used. And it's this story where two brothers offer sacrifices to God, Cain and Abel. And God is pleased with Abel's sacrifice, but Cain doesn't get the same favor for his sacrifice. And so his face is downcast. So he's unhappy. He's unfulfilled. And God talks to him about it. And he says, there is a way for you to find that fulfillment that you want. You can find favor if you do what's right. But watch out. Sin is crouching at your door and it wants to have you. You need to rule over it. So sin is there pictured as this predator that wants to pounce on Cain and consume him and eat him. And Cain is told he has a choice between being taken over by this power or being the ruler of it. Then earlier in Genesis, it talks about the creation of humanity. And it talks about how we were made to rule on the land, to be the image of God, displaying his wisdom and his splendor and his majesty. And now Adam and Eve were supposed to do that, and they failed. They didn't display the wisdom of God. They created their own counterfeit. Now Cain, is he going to display something of the rule of God, of who God is and what he created humanity to be? Or is he going to be consumed by these desires that are making him downcast? Whenever we sin, I think we're like Cain, we're unsatisfied by how something is going in our life. Cain is downcast because he's not found God's favor. And he's trying to find some path towards feeling God's favor, or he's trying to create a situation in which he can attain God's favor, but not in the way that God is actually offering it. So he murders his brother Abel, kills Abel, as if that is going to solve his problem, as if he's going to find God's favor because Abel is dead and that God has no one else to be pleased with. So he's just going to be pleased with Cain. It's crazy, but it is crazy every time we sin. We're not just doing some bad action, but we find ourselves in a situation where we're downcast, we're unhappy, and we're reaching out to try and find that satisfaction that we were made for, the purpose we were made for, to display the splendor and majesty of God, to know God and enjoy him forever. And reach out to try and fill that hole, but then try and fill it with something that is totally not that. It's like trying to put a triangle peg in a square-shaped hole. It's just not going to fit. Augustine said, God has made us for himself, and so our soul is restless until it finds its rest in him. Every time we sin, it's like we're trying to find rest on a treadmill, and we just keep running, and we're never going to get there, and we get more and more fatigued, more and more weary, until eventually we're empty and dead and withered up. So I was at university struggling with this question: do I want Jesus or sin? And as I thought about it, the clash was becoming more and more obvious to me, that the story I was living was clashing with the story of Jesus. The main thing that I really struggled with was I loved going out and getting drunk with my mates. And it wasn't really so much that I enjoyed drunkenness so much as I loved to have a story to tell the next day. Someone might say, Jack, what happened to your face? Why is it covered in these scratches? And then I could say, well, last night I was out and have a story to tell. Or Jack, where are your shoes? Oh, well, funny story, Or have I ever told you about the time I had a fight with a guy called Butcher? And I thought, well, what if I give up this kind of like wild behavior, going out and getting rowdy with my mates, what stories will I have to tell? What can I tell people about myself that is just, this morning I had a lie-in, and then I watched a TV show until lunchtime. And then, what have I done? Nothing. And I was thinking I have a choice between being nothing, having nothing to say, and being a clown, acting like a clown to impress my friends. And it's kind of sad looking back that I really believed that the only way that I could have a story to tell, the only way I could be a person that was worth knowing, was if I became a clown because I didn't think that anything else about me was worth knowing. In John chapter 4, Jesus is traveling through Samaria, which is in northern Israel. When Jesus was alive, the Samaritans and the Jews hated each other. So even though Samaria is part of Israel and Jesus is a Jew, a descendant of Israelites, when Jesus is passing through Samaria, it's like he's a foreigner going through a land where he's a stranger. And he stops at a well. And this Samaritan woman comes to the well. Now, if you're familiar with the Hebrew Bible and ancient Israelite literature, this scene of a stranger at a well meeting a woman might trigger something in your mind. Right? It's going to remind you of other stories you've heard like that. In the Bible, when Abraham wants a wife for his son Isaac, he sends his servant to another land. And his servant is a stranger in this land. And he meets Rebecca at a well. And he speaks to Rebecca, and Rebecca comes back with him to become Isaac's wife. When Isaac's son, Jacob, grows up, he flees from Canaan because he's fallen out with his brother. He flees and he goes to another land, and at a well, he meets Rachel. Jacob and Rachel then get married. Later on, Moses, when he flees from Egypt, he goes to the land of Midian, where he's a stranger, and he meets at a well a woman called Zipporah, who becomes his wife. So maybe you just noticed a pattern. If you've got some pattern recognition ability, you'll be like, oh, a man is a stranger. He meets a woman at a well, and then she becomes his wife, or the wife of someone that he's representing. So that pattern it's in Hebrew literature. It's like a literary trope. If you hear the story, you know where it's going. It's like, when you're watching a rom-com, when the man and the woman reach out for the same cereal box and then their hands touch and they look each other in the eye, well, I know how this story is going to end. So Jesus is traveling through Samaria where he's a stranger. He's not part of their community. And he meets a woman at a well. And this woman, he talks to her about satisfaction, about a thirst being quenched. This woman, as he talks to her, she's becoming interested in what he has to say, and she's becoming moved by what he has to say. And he tells her to go and fetch her husband, and she says, I have no husband. Jesus says, I know you have had 5 husbands. The man you live with now is not your husband. Numbers in the Bible are significant. So this woman is currently with her 6th man. And Jesus, this potential groom, really is how he's being portrayed in this story, has just met her at the well. He's the 7th. In the Bible, 7 symbolizes perfection and completeness. The world's made in 7 days. And the Hebrew word for 7 is also the Hebrew word for completeness. So 7 and the 7th is the perfect one, the completeness. And then 6 is what falls short of that. So this woman with 6 men has been unsatisfied. Her thirst has never been quenched. And then she meets Jesus, the 7th, the perfect man. And he is the one who can satisfy her thirst. He's the one who has the fullness of life to give. He's the one who can make sense of your story and give your life meaning. So I was struggling with my decision to choose between Jesus and sin. And eventually I was at a student conference, a Christian student conference, and I had this, as I was listening to the songs that we were singing and hearing the story of Jesus changing the world, I had this moment where I realized that that's the story that I want to live for. I don't want to live for the old story I was living anymore. I didn't want to be a clown. I wanted my life to matter. I wanted my life to have eternal significance. I wanted to be part of the kingdom that Jesus was building on earth. I recognized as well that the way I'd been living was evil, that I hadn't just been indulging in some vices, but I'd been treating God in an insulting way. I've been acting like there's all these different things that can give me pleasure, that can contribute to my satisfaction. There's drunkenness, there's television, there's friendship with people, there's pornography. Some of those things really obviously wrong. Other things actually good things. But alongside those things was also God. I had these different things that were equally sources of satisfaction to me. But it's insulting to God to treat him, the greatest good and the only one who satisfies, as though he's equal to a mere human being that I'm friends with. But even more insulting to act like this gross vice that I have is equal to him, a potential avenue in which I can find satisfaction. I realized how terrible it was to be living like that. That is essentially what sin is. To treat something that maybe is good, but is not God, as if it's God. And even worse, to treat something that is obviously wrong and evil, as if it is equal to God. I felt convicted by that, and I wanted it to change. I'd had all of these justifications in my mind that allowed me to engage in these behaviors as well. What I was doing wasn't really bad because I wasn't hurting anyone or whatever justifications I came up with. And I also realized I've been so arrogant to act as if I can come up with a justification for a behavior that God has said don't engage in that. And there were some things at that time where I thought, I don't really know why I shouldn't be drinking to excess. I don't see what's wrong with it. But I just thought I can't treat my ability to justify something or make up a logic for whether it's right or wrong as if that is equal to God's knowledge, the one who knows all things and made all things, and me. We're not on the same level when we're discerning right and wrong. That's essentially, the Adam and Eve's problem. Don't eat the fruit, said God. And then the snake said, well, maybe you can eat the fruit. And they thought, yeah, I think I can justify this to myself. And they're acting as if their wisdom is equal to God's, and it isn't. We need to receive wisdom from God, not try to justify all of our vices. Even though I felt that conviction that something needed to change, I decided, yes, I want to obey God. I want to be delighted in him. I want to recognize that he is the God of my life and live for him. I still felt that struggle as I was choosing between Jesus and sin. And I still believed if I stop all this sort of rowdiness, I thought maybe I won't have any stories to tell. I feared that I wouldn't have those stories to tell, that I would become boring in the eyes of everyone around me. That's something that I feared. But I was willing to risk that and make that sacrifice. A sacrifice is actually part of the story of Jesus. Jesus made the greatest sacrifice for us. He sweat blood and he cried in the garden, but he accepted the cup of suffering and he drank it. He accepted the cup of God's wrath and he drank it. The death that Adam and Eve brought on themselves when they made their own wisdom equal to God's or greater than God's. The death that Cain brought on himself when he became a slave of that power of sin that was crouching ready to consume him. And the death that I earned for myself by drinking from toxic wells that would never satisfy me. Jesus bore in himself. He bore our sin in his body on the cross. He died so that we could pass through death and receive eternal life. His life is greater than death, and he shares it with us. So the story of Jesus is a story of sacrifice. And when we're being invited to follow Jesus, we're not just being invited to receive the benefits of Jesus' sacrifice, but to unite ourselves to Jesus in his death as well as in his resurrection. Jesus suffered because on the other side of suffering there was joy, which was the reconciliation of the nations with the Father. And we're invited to follow him into his death. We're invited to follow him into suffering and sacrifice, and then realize on the other side that what we receive is the fullness of life. So that's why he said, whoever tries to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses it for my sake will find it. When we follow Jesus and we're willing to make the sacrifice where we think, actually, I might be losing whatever is dear to me in following Jesus. When we recognize that and say, yeah, I want to do it, that's when we find the fullness of life that Jesus offers us. That's when actually, like the woman at the well, we find that satisfaction that Jesus was talking about. I remember reading The Woman at the Well a few weeks after I had that moment, and I thought, I know what Jesus is talking about. This water, if you drink it, you never thirst again. I've been so thirsty, like Cain, with my face downcast, wanting something that I couldn't achieve. And God is saying, there's a way for you to get this. And the way is Jesus. To trust in him and receive the life. To lay down what we thought was so precious. And then realize we receive what is most precious in Jesus. So now I have stories to tell. I do. That desire I had to have a life that was meaningful was a good desire. And even though I felt like I was laying it down, actually I was finding the real thing that I was yearning for. Now I have stories to tell where I'm not a clown. I have stories about how God has worked in my life. Instead of stories that began with I was drunk, I have stories that began with I was praying. And the reason I think now I have stories that are so meaningful is because the main character isn't me. The world isn't all about me. The main character in these stories is Jesus. Because all things were made through him and for him. What would you say is the story of your life? What story do you tell when you have a chance to tell someone a bit about yourself? What is it that makes your life meaningful? What might you need to sacrifice and lay down so that you can live the life that you were created for?